Hello and welcome to the garage. In this episode, we're going to discover the difference between removing your tire off of your car using a breaker bar, which is a manual method, and a common torque wrench to torque the lug nuts to the required torque to reattach the wheel to the car. All that versus using an air-powered impact driver for removing and reattaching the lug nuts, and then a set of torque bars here to properly torque the lug nuts to the required torque. So let's have a look now and see what the difference between the two is, what's involved between one and the next, and why you should choose one or the other that suits you best. Let's have a look now at the manual method of actually removing the lug nuts from the wheel. So this video doesn't go forever. I'm not going to actually remove the wheel, but instead I'm going to remove two of the lug nuts that are already torqued to 129 foot-pounds. I've installed the jack. It's under the car. I have a lifting puck in place. I actually have some positive pressure here on the back right of the car. And so the procedure is to manually remove the lug nuts. So let's get started. First thing is I need to loosen the lug nut here. Now I can't do that necessarily with the full weight of the car, so I'm going to jack up the car slightly to take most of the weight of the car off of the wheel, and just enough to keep enough friction here in this tire from rotating when I use the breaker bar to actually loosen the lug nut. So let me jack up the car. Like I said, I pre-installed the jack. I don't want the wheel to come off, but I want it to almost come off. Okay, the next procedure is grab the socket, which is a 21 millimeter for this given car, and this is a Tesla Model Y, and I install the 21 millimeter socket with a short extension on a 24-inch breaker bar. So the procedure would be, let's use this lug nut, stick it in, and I pull to loosen up these lug nuts. Find the other one. Okay, that's the first thing that you would do, and you would want to loosen up all the lug nuts enough where you can take them off by hand. But remember, most of the weight is not on this tire. So then I would jack up the car the rest of the way till it's off of the ground, okay? Now, what I would do from this point manually is I would take the socket and the extension and use it as a screwdriver and take off the lug nut. And I loosen this one as well. And that's how I would remove the lug nuts, okay? And I would remove, of course, all 5 lug nuts, pull the wheel off and change it or whatever I was doing. I'm now going to take the lug nut, stick it into the 21 millimeter socket, and then hand thread it on. You do this because if you ever cross thread these, you will have a seriously bad day. Okay, so I make sure that they're threaded properly and they're on and they're tight by hand. Now let's lower the car. Going to lower it just enough to put some pressure on the wheel. There we go. Now I'm going to take the same socket and I'm going to put it on the torque wrench, and I've previously dialed in 129 pounds here on the torque wrench. All right. Now I'm going to tighten up the 2 that I loosened up, and this particular wrench goes until it clicks. Once it clicks, that means I'm at the required torque. Now let's listen. Okay, and I'll go to the other one. Now normally when I torque across, you're supposed to torque opposite. So I would torque this one, but this one's torqued already, and then that one, then this one, then that one. But for our demo, I'll just do the one I loosened up. Okay, as it gets tighter and tighter, it's going to click. Okay, and I can go back to this one, and then we're done. So essentially, that's the procedure to remove and reattach a wheel on your Tesla using the manual torque wrench. So let's now hook up the impact driver, and I'll show you the procedure you use to do that one. So here is the procedure to use the impact driver to remove the tire from the Tesla. First thing you do is, of course, install the jack, install the lifting puck in the required location, and then you can jack it up. Now, if you remember the manual way, I jacked it up a little bit. I ended up breaking these loose, jack it up the rest, and then unscrew it. So here's the procedure with the impact driver. You jack up the car all the way, right? There's no need to break the nuts loose. If your impact driver is properly set up and you have the proper pressure and you've got the proper hoses, you're good to go. So you want to make sure that it turns counterclockwise. And there you go. So we're going to loosen the same two we loosened using the manual method. So here goes. Watch your ears. Okay. And there you go. The impact driver is a bit more efficient, it's way more powerful, and the good part is you can have this off the ground. So what does that mean? That means I can pull all 5 of these babies off here, and I can pull that tire off, and I can do whatever, I can stick it back on. But now, how efficient is it to actually reattach the tires? So, reverse, I take the lug nut, I manually thread it back on. Remember, that's really important. You don't want to cross-thread it. If you cross-thread it with an impact driver, you run the risk of damaging the stud or the bolt, the nut, or both, and you don't want to do that. Always a good idea to manually put these on. Okay, they are on. All right, let's get the torque wrench hooked up here and put these 2 lug nuts back on at the proper torque. I start with a 21mm socket. I use a little short extension always just because it's easier to get it on and off. I'm going to grab the torque bar. Now you can't read this, but it's 130 foot-pounds. So I'm going to stick that here. I'm going to stick it onto my impact driver. Make sure we're in the right hole. And now I got quite the contraption. I take it and I reverse its direction to on. I press it ever so slightly, and it's turning the correct way. Now, the pressure exerted from the impact driver will tighten up the nut. But the cool part is this part of the torque bar will actually twist and keep the impact driver from continually tightening up the lug nut. So it gets tightened to exactly 130, 129, or 131 foot-pounds, okay? So here goes. Stick that on, and here we go. Watch your ears. All right, and then on to the next one. All right. All right, we use so much air, the compressor's running now, and it's going to probably run for a little bit. I'll be back, and we will do a wrap-up here and see what actually happened. Well, there you have it. That's how you remove the tire both manually as well as using the impact driver. So let's talk a little bit about what we did. This is a 24-inch breaker bar, has a 1/2-inch drive on one end. I hooked that into the 21mm socket to break the tires loose. The car, depending upon which wheel you're trying to break the lug nuts loose on, must be on the ground a little bit to keep it from turning when I put a lot of pressure here to go ahead and loosen up those lug nuts. Once I get the tire replaced or changed or whatever I'm trying to do to get it back on the car, I'll take, using the 21 millimeter socket, hand thread all 5 of them on to make sure I'm not cross-threading it. After that point, I go ahead and lower the car onto the ground just slightly so that the rotational part of using the torque wrench here won't allow the wheel to turn. I then, of course, set this for 129 foot-pounds. I go ahead and apply pressure on the first lug nut and then across the wheel to the opposite side, and then keep jumping around. And once all have been torqued, I go all the way around the circle in sequence and make sure we're at that clicky stage. That's what's involved in doing it manually. It's not difficult. It takes maybe another step or two. If you're lucky and you have yourself a good air supply in the garage, you can use a tool like this. This is an air-operated impact wrench. It's also half-inch drive. What's shown here now is the torque bar. So the procedure, of course, in removing the tire using the impact driver is I can jack the car all the way off the ground. And because of the nature of the impact driver, I can actually spin the lug nuts loose using the impact driver right here. Simply, I take this, I hook it in, and I run it backwards, and it takes the lug nut loose. I change the tire or whatever I'm going to do. I go ahead and put the tire back on. I take the 21 millimeter socket, I stick the lug nut on, and I hand thread it. I hand thread all 5 down to a point where I can't turn it anymore. At that point in time, I take the socket, I stick my torque bar in here, and the torque bar, of course, limits the amount of torque that can actually be applied to the lug nut to get it as close as possible to the 29 foot-pounds. This particular one's set for 130 foot-pounds, and it ends up getting close. I measured it with the torque wrench itself, and it's coming in at about 126 foot-pounds of torque, at which point I use the torque wrench to make sure that it's at 129 foot-pounds. I'm not sure why I'm not able to get the specified 130. I don't want to exceed the rating of the torque wrench, so I have 3/8 line. I'm running 110 pounds while it's stopped and about 95 or so when it's running. Perhaps I need to run the pressure on the air supply higher, but I'm trying not to exceed the recommended 90 foot-pounds that the wrench actually says. The torque wrench should, the torque bar I should say, should torque it to pretty darn close to 130. So I have a little debugging to do to kind of figure out exactly why that's not happening. But suffice to say, I'm able to use the impact driver to remove and reinstall and torque it down. I'm assuming maybe I have a problem with my air supply. I don't know. But in any case, that's what I'm getting here now. So if you have the air supply in the garage, this makes it maybe just one step less to remove and install the lug nuts on a tire. Frankly, it's more hassle than just doing it manually using my breaker bar and my torque wrench. But I thought I would give it a shot and see exactly what's going on. It's a possibility that this Earthquake XT that I bought from Harbor Freight, and it's an expensive tool, being almost 1,200 foot-pounds of torque, you would think that it'd have no trouble. But I'm pretty sure that maybe they dropped a 1 off of it instead of 90 PSI. It should have been 190 PSI, I don't know. But I'm assuming that this is probably not the best impact wrench that I can buy. I can always spend even more money. But I am going to try my buddy's who has a commercial version of this using the same setup, all except for the impact wrench, and that may be in another video. However, if you have a good air supply and an impact wrench that will actually be strong enough to utilize the torque bar here, you should be able to put your lug nuts back on at the proper torque without even touching a torque wrench. So there you have it. It's this way or that way, your choice, of course, to be able to use the torque wrench and or breaker bar, or use the impact driver. It's your choice. If you like this video, go ahead and click the like, click subscribe, and don't forget to click the bell icon to not miss anything going forward. If you'd like to buy yourself a Tesla, the Tesla referral link shown here at the bottom of the screen gets you 1,000 miles or 1,500 kilometers of free supercharging. Thank you for watching. I'll look for you in the next one, and take care.